luxury, power, speed beyond imagination. Beneath the flawless shine of multi-million-dollar supercars lies a darker reality few dare to discuss. Tonight, we pull back the velvet curtain on some of the most disturbing car crash deaths involving the world's most elite machines. In a single irreversible moment, glamour collided with fate. Buckle up, because what you're about to witness isn't just tragic, it's chilling. Bessie Smith. Long before rock and roll shook America, there was a voice so powerful it could command an entire theater without a microphone. Bessie Smith, crowned the Empress of the Blues, was the undisputed queen of the jazz age. Born in Chattanooga, Tennessee in 1894, she rose from poverty and hardship to become the most influential female blues singer of her era. Orphaned at a young age, Bessie performed on street corners for spare change before joining traveling shows where she sharpened her commanding stage presence and developed the emotional force that would define her career. In 1923, she signed with Columbia Records and quickly became the label's biggest star. Her recordings sold in massive numbers, and her voice, raw, soulful, and unapologetically honest, resonated across a segregated America. She sang of heartbreak, resilience, and survival, pouring lived experience into every note. During the 1920s, she was one of the highest-paid black entertainers in the country. But when the Great Depression hit record, sales declined and touring once again became essential. On the night of September 26, 1937, Bessie was traveling along U.S. Route 61 between Memphis, Tennessee and Clarksdale, Mississippi, with her companion Richard Morgan, who was driving. It was nearly 2 a.m. The road was dark and quiet. Ahead of them was a slow-moving truck. Morgan attempted to pass but misjudged the situation. The vehicle collided with the truck in a violent side impact crash that tore the roof from their car. Bessie, seated in the passenger side, suffered devastating injuries. Her right arm was nearly severed at the elbow, and she endured severe trauma to her body. Morgan survived the crash, but Bessie lay critically injured on the roadside. A local surgeon, Dr. Hugh Smith, happened upon the scene and immediately began providing emergency aid, attempting to stabilize her until transport could arrive. 2 ambulances were dispatched, one from a black hospital and one from a white hospital, reflecting the harsh segregation laws of the Deep South at that time. Bessie was transported to the G.T. Thomas Afro-American Hospital in Clarksdale. Despite their efforts, she never regained consciousness and died later that morning. In the years that followed, rumors spread that she had been denied treatment at a white hospital because of her race. The story gained traction and was repeated in articles and dramatic works, including interpretations that shaped public memory of her death. However, those present at the scene, including Dr. Hugh Smith, stated that no such refusal occurred and that the nearest appropriate facility for her was the one to which she was taken. The myth endured, adding another layer of controversy to an already tragic ending. Bessie Smith was buried in Philadelphia on October 4, 1937, with thousands attending her funeral. Yet astonishingly, her grave remained unmarked for decades. It was not until 1970 that a proper headstone was finally placed, funded in part by singer Janis Joplin, who deeply admired her. The marker at last honored a woman whose voice had shaped American music. The highway that night ended Bessie Smith's life, but it did not silence her legacy. Her recordings continue to echo across generations, reminding the world that even when fate strikes without warning, a voice powerful enough can outlive the road that tried to silence it. James Dean. Are even the brightest stars safe from life's darkest turns? On September 30th, 1955, as the California sun dipped low over the highway, James Dean was behind the wheel of his silver Porsche 550 Spyder, the car he famously nicknamed Little Bastard, heading toward Salinas for a racing event that he had eagerly anticipated. At just 24 years old, Dean was already becoming a cultural force. Born in Marion, Indiana, he carried a restless ambition that led him to study drama at UCLA, where his raw emotional intensity quickly set him apart. His breakthrough performance in East of Eden stunned critics and audiences alike, marking him as one of Hollywood's most promising young actors. Soon after, his role in Rebel Without a Cause transformed him into the ultimate symbol of teenage rebellion, a brooding presence in a red jacket who seemed to embody an entire generation's frustration and longing. But off-screen, Dean had developed another passion, one that pulsed with danger. Racing was no casual hobby for him. After completing the film Giant, he invested his growing earnings into high-performance machines, first a Triumph motorcycle, then a Porsche 356 Speedster, and finally the powerful 550 Spider. Low to the ground and engineered for speed, the car demanded respect and precision. On that fateful afternoon, Dean initially planned to have the Porsche towed to the race, but the decision changed and he chose to drive it himself, hoping to gain more experience with the vehicle. Around 3:30 p.m., he was stopped for speeding, a moment that in hindsight feels like a chilling warning. Undeterred, he continued west on Route 466, approaching the junction of what is now State Route 46 and 41 as the evening light began to fade. At approximately 5:45 p.m., a 1950 Ford Tudor driven by a young college student began turning left at the intersection, crossing directly into Dean's path. With only seconds to respond, Dean reportedly attempted a last-second maneuver to avoid the collision, but the distance was too short and the speed too great. The Porsche slammed nearly head-on into the Ford, the force sending little bastard airborne before it crashed into a roadside gully. When emergency responders arrived, the wreckage told a devastating story. Dean was found unconscious and gravely injured. He was rushed to Paso Robles War Memorial Hospital, where at 6:20 p.m. James Dean was pronounced dead on arrival. An official inquest later ruled the crash accidental with no criminal wrongdoing found, yet the shockwaves through Hollywood were immediate and profound. Less than a month later, Rebel Without a Cause premiered, and audiences watching the young rebel on screen now understood that the intensity in his eyes would never fade with age. James Dean did not live long enough to see the full magnitude of his own fame. Instead, he became forever frozen in youth, a legend defined not only by talent and charisma, but by a single tragic turn on a quiet California highway that ended a brilliant life just as it was accelerating toward greatness. Grace Kelly. Before she became Princess Grace of Monaco, she was simply Grace Kelly, one of the most elegant and sought-after actresses in Hollywood. Born in Philadelphia in 1929, Grace Patricia Kelly possessed a rare combination of poise, beauty, and quiet intensity that captivated filmmakers and audiences alike. Her performances in films directed by Alfred Hitchcock helped cement her status as one of the brightest stars of the 1950s. Working alongside legends like Clark Gable and Ava Gardner, she quickly rose to the top tier of Hollywood's elite. Then came the real-life fairy tale. In 1955, while attending the Cannes Film Festival, she met Rainier III, Prince of Monaco. What began as a formal meeting soon blossomed into romance. By April 1956, Grace Kelly left behind her film career to marry the prince in a ceremony watched around the world. She transitioned from Oscar-winning actress to Princess of Monaco, dedicating herself to royal duties and raising their 3 children. To millions, she represented the ultimate dream, a Hollywood star who stepped into a palace and seemed to live a storybook life. But on September 13, 1982, that fairy tale took a devastating turn. Grace and her 17-year-old daughter, Princess Stephanie, were driving from the family's country home in Rock Aigle back to Monaco. The route wound through steep mountain roads along the French Riviera, sharp curves hugging dramatic cliffs. That morning, Grace chose to drive herself. The car, a Rover 3500, was reportedly filled with clothing and personal items. As they navigated the narrow road, Grace suddenly lost control of the vehicle. Doctors would later determine that she had suffered a mild cerebral vascular incident similar to a stroke, causing her to lose consciousness briefly. Without control, the car veered off the roadway, plunged down a mountainside, and tumbled roughly 100 feet before coming to rest in a garden below. Princess Stephanie survived with relatively minor injuries. Grace, however, was critically wounded. She was rushed to the hospital in Monaco and remained in a coma. On September 14, 1982, after medical evaluations revealed catastrophic brain damage, Prince Rainier made the heartbreaking decision to remove her from life support. In the days that followed, rumors began circulating. Some speculated that Stephanie had been driving. Others suggested there had been an argument in the car. Stephanie later firmly denied these claims, explaining that she exited from the driver's side only because the passenger door had been crushed in the crash. Official reports confirmed that Grace had been behind the wheel. On September 18, 1982, nearly 100 million people around the world watched her funeral. Heads of state royalty and Hollywood figures gathered at the Monaco Cathedral, the very place where her fairy tale wedding had taken place 26 years earlier. The contrast was heartbreaking. Grace Kelly's life had seemed almost cinematic in its perfection, a seamless transition from silver screen icon to real-life princess. Yet in the end, it was not a dramatic film scene, but a quiet mountain road that brought her story to a close. Her legacy remains one of elegance, transformation, and the fragile truth that even royalty is not shielded from fate's sudden turns. If stories like these keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next shocking case. Jayne Mansfield. The summer of 1967. Jayne Mansfield was no stranger to headlines. Born Vera Jane Palmer in Pennsylvania, she had transformed herself into one of Hollywood's most talked about blonde bombshells, carefully crafting an image that demanded attention. She was intelligent, ambitious, and fully aware of how to command the spotlight. In the 1950s, she rose to fame with provocative roles and bold publicity stunts, becoming one of the early Playboy playmates and constantly drawing comparisons to Marilyn Monroe. She lived extravagantly in her famous pink mansion, surrounded by publicity, glamour, and spectacle. Yet as Hollywood's standards of beauty began to shift in the 1960s, Mansfield found herself performing more frequently in nightclubs and regional venues, determined to reclaim her place at the top. Just after midnight on June 29, 1967, Mansfield left a nightclub engagement in Biloxi, Mississippi, heading toward New Orleans for a television appearance scheduled the next day. In the car with her were her boyfriend Sam Brody, their driver Ronnie Harrison, and 3 of her young children asleep in the back seat. They were traveling in a 1966 Buick Electra 225 along US Highway 90, a dark stretch of coastal road that cut through swampy marshland. The warm summer air was thick, and as the night deepened, a heavy mist began to settle over the highway, reducing visibility to almost nothing. As the Buick moved forward at high speed, another hazard loomed ahead. A slow-moving mosquito fogging truck was spraying insecticide into the humid air, creating an even denser cloud that blended with the natural fog. Visibility dropped dramatically. According to reports, the Buick was traveling at approximately 80 miles per hour when it approached the rear of an 18-wheeler truck moving more slowly along the road. By the time the driver realized what was ahead, it was too late. The Buick slammed into the back of the trailer with devastating force and slid underneath it, shearing off the top portion of the car. The impact was catastrophic for the adults in the front seat. Jayne Mansfield, Sam Brody, and Ronnie Harrison were killed instantly. Her children in the back seat survived with injuries, a detail that added another layer of heartbreak to the tragedy. In the immediate aftermath, shocking images from the crash circulated in newspapers, fueling rumors and urban legends. The tragedy did not end with speculation. The manner in which the Buick slid under the trailer prompted serious safety concerns nationwide. In response, federal authorities later required underride guards on semi-truck trailers, safety bars designed to prevent vehicles from sliding beneath them during rear-end collisions. These protective bars became informally known as Mansfield bars, linking her name forever to a reform born out of disaster. Jayne Mansfield had built her life on spectacle, glamour, and bold reinvention. But on that fog-shrouded Mississippi highway, the spotlight vanished without warning. What remained was a haunting reminder that even the brightest stars can disappear in an instant, leaving behind headlines, legends, and a legacy shaped as much by tragedy as by fame. Paul Walker. On November 30th, 2013, the day began like any other for Paul Walker. The 40-year-old actor, best known for his role as Brian O'Connor in the Fast and the Furious franchise, was spending time with his mother and his teenage daughter Meadow, casually talking about picking out a Christmas tree. It was an ordinary, peaceful afternoon. Then a reminder came through about a charity event he needed to attend. Within minutes, Walker left the house, unaware that this would be the final chapter of his life. Born in Glendale, California, Paul William Walker IV had been in front of the camera since childhood, appearing in commercials before landing roles in television shows and teen films during the 1990s. But it was the Fast and the Furious in 2001 that transformed him into a global star. Audiences connected with his calm charisma, his loyalty on screen, and his believable passion for cars. Off-screen, that passion was just as real. Walker was deeply involved in car culture and co-owned a high-performance auto shop. He also founded the nonprofit Reach Out Worldwide, dedicating himself to disaster relief efforts across the globe. That afternoon, the charity event was held at his auto shop in Santa Clarita. After it concluded, Walker decided to go for a short ride with his friend Roger Rodas, a professional driver and financial advisor, in a 2005 Porsche Carrera GT. The car was known for its extreme power and challenging handling. Around 3:30 p.m., the Porsche accelerated down a local road. Investigators later estimated the vehicle was traveling between 80 and 100 miles per hour when it lost control. The car struck a curb, then a tree, then a light pole before hitting another tree and bursting into flames. Witnesses rushed toward the wreckage, but the fire was intense. Emergency responders arrived quickly, yet there was nothing they could do. Both Roger Rodas and Paul Walker were pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities later concluded that excessive speed and the condition of the tires were primary factors in the crash, and toxicology reports found no evidence of drugs or alcohol. The news spread within hours, sending shockwaves through Hollywood and around the world. Fans gathered at the crash site, turning it into a memorial filled with flowers, candles, and handwritten notes. Production on Furious 7 was temporarily halted as filmmakers and Walker's family decided how to proceed. Ultimately, his brothers helped complete remaining scenes, and advanced visual effects were used to honor his character. The film's closing tribute, featuring a quiet farewell between two friends driving in separate directions, became one of the most emotional moments in modern cinema. Paul Walker's life was defined by loyalty, speed, and a deep love for family, both on-screen and off. In a franchise built around fast cars and dangerous roads, few could have imagined that reality would mirror fiction so closely. His final ride was not part of a script, but it forever changed the story, leaving behind a legacy of brotherhood and a reminder that even those who seem fearless behind the wheel are not immune to fate. Lin Gu. In the early morning hours of March 18, 2012, a black Ferrari 458 Spider was racing down Beijing's North 4th Ring Road. The city was quiet, the highway nearly empty. Then in a split second, everything changed. Behind the wheel was Lin Gu, 23 years old, the only son of Lin Jihua, one of China's most powerful political figures, and a close aide to then-President Hu Jintao. In the car with him were two young women. Reports later suggested they were either partially clothed or not clothed at all, sparking rumors that reckless behavior may have played a role in what happened next. Near Baofuzi Bridge, the Ferrari lost control and slammed into a wall at high speed. The impact was devastating. Lin Gu died at the scene. One of the women was also killed. The other survived but suffered catastrophic injuries, leaving her paralyzed from the neck down. The car, worth nearly $500,000, was reduced to twisted metal. At first, it seemed like a tragic but isolated crash. Then, the photo surfaced. An image of the wrecked Ferrari appeared in the Beijing Evening News and quickly spread across Chinese social media. Questions flooded the internet. Who was driving? How could the son of a government official afford such an extravagant car? What really happened inside that vehicle? Within hours, the posts began disappearing. Searches for keywords like Ferrari and Lin Gu returned nothing. Government censors moved swiftly, scrubbing discussions from the web. Official silence followed. Behind the scenes, the situation grew more complicated. Lin Gu's name was reportedly altered in certain records, at times replaced with another surname. There were claims that Lin Jihua initially denied the body was his son and sought help from senior security officials to manage the fallout. While none of this was publicly acknowledged, political circles in Beijing were well aware of what had happened. The timing made the crash even more explosive. China was just weeks away from a historic leadership transition, with Xi Jinping preparing to take power. Lin Jihua had been expected to rise into the Politburo, the country's top decision-making body. Instead, 5 months later, he was quietly removed from his influential post and reassigned. Hong Kong's South China Morning Post eventually confirmed Lin Gu's death, and international media picked up the story. On the mainland, however, state media remained largely silent. Online outrage simmered. Many citizens saw the crash as a symbol of elite privilege, questioning how families of officials with modest public salaries could be linked to luxury cars and lavish lifestyles. There were also reports that the families of the two women were offered financial compensation to remain quiet. Attempts were allegedly made online to discredit or drown out the story. But despite the censorship, the memory of that black Ferrari on a Beijing highway refused to fade. There was no public mourning. No official statement, just silence. Yet the crash became one of the most talked about political scandals in modern China. In a single violent moment, speed collided with secrecy and privilege collided with reality. The wreckage of that Ferrari did more than end lives. It exposed the fragile line between power and accountability, a line that even the fastest car in the world could not outrun. Turn on notifications so you're the first to know when we drop a new deep dive into the world's most unbelievable events. Kurt and Monica Villani, the Niagara Border Inferno. November 22, 2023, just days before Thanksgiving. Late that morning, traffic moved steadily toward the Rainbow Bridge crossing at Niagara Falls, one of the busiest links between the United States and Canada. Families were traveling for the holiday. Cars lined up at inspection booths. Nothing seemed unusual. Then, at approximately 11:30 a.m., a silver Bentley Flying Spur shot down Niagara Street at extreme speed. Security footage later showed the luxury sedan weaving past slower vehicles, running multiple red lights and accelerating through intersections. Within roughly 30 seconds, the car had crossed several blocks. It then struck a median at high speed, launched into the air, and slammed directly into a border inspection booth. The explosion was immediate and massive. A fireball engulfed the area. Debris scattered across the roadway. Thick smoke rose above the bridge as border officers rushed toward the wreckage. All 4 U.S.-Canada border crossings in the region were shut down. Initial fears of a deliberate attack spread quickly across social media and news outlets. But as investigators worked through the evidence, officials ruled out terrorism or criminal intent. The FBI confirmed it was a traffic accident. 2 days later, authorities identified the victims as Kurt and Monica Vani, both 53 years old, from Grand Island, New York. Married since 1995, they were well known in their community for operating Gui's Lumber, a family-owned hardware business with multiple locations in western New York. Friends described them as generous and deeply involved in local causes. That morning, the couple had planned to travel to Toronto to attend a Kiss concert. Before heading to the border, they stopped at the Seneca Niagara Resort and Casino. The concert had been canceled just hours earlier, though it remains unclear whether they were aware of that at the time. From the moment the Bentley turned onto Niagara Street to the moment of impact, only about half a minute had passed. The 2022 Bentley Flying Spur is a high-performance luxury sedan capable of accelerating from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 4 seconds. Weighing over 5,000 pounds and valued at more than $200,000, it is built for speed and power. Video analysis later showed the vehicle traveling at an extremely high rate before the crash. A border officer inside the inspection booth suffered minor injuries and survived. Kurt and Monica did not. Investigators examined whether mechanical failure played a role. Weeks earlier, Kurt had reportedly told friends he believed something might be wrong with the gas pedal. It is unclear whether the vehicle was inspected prior to the crash. While Bentley had issued recalls on certain models in previous years, none were directly linked to unintended acceleration in this specific configuration. A road safety engineer reviewing the footage observed what appeared to be a dark vapor trail behind the car, likely from the tires. This suggested the driver may have been braking heavily in the final seconds, possibly attempting to regain control. Despite the official ruling of accident, the crash left lingering questions. How did a routine holiday trip turn into a catastrophic border explosion in less than a minute? The Vanis left behind 2 adult children and a community in shock. In a span of seconds, a luxury sedan became a fireball at an international crossing, turning an ordinary morning into a scene that would dominate headlines across North America. Once again, a vehicle designed for performance proved unforgiving when speed, circumstance, and fate converged. DJ Hysni Kestaj and Anna Krajewska. March 31st, 2024, Easter Sunday, Northern Italy. Just after midday, a white Ferrari GTC4 was tearing down the A4 to A5 highway between Ivrea and Santhia. Behind the wheel was 40-year-old DJ Hysni Kestaj, known in nightlife circles as DJ Style Q. In the passenger seat sat 21-year-old Ukrainian model Anna Krajewska. Hours earlier, Kestaj had performed at the Jukebox Club in Sion, Switzerland. Witnesses saw him leave the venue with Anna. What began as a glamorous cross-border drive in a high-powered luxury car would end in one of Italy's most violent road crashes of the year. According to investigators, the Ferrari was traveling at nearly 200 kilometers per hour, about 124 miles per hour, as it approached the area near the town of Alice Castello. At that speed, even the smallest miscalculation can become fatal. Suddenly, Kestaj lost control. The Ferrari slammed into a guardrail with extreme force. The impact was so violent that the car split in half. The entire front section where both occupants were seated was destroyed and quickly engulfed in flames. One of the front wheels was thrown yards away from the wreckage. Only the rear portion of the vehicle remained partially intact, a twisted reminder of what had once been a six-figure supercar. Emergency crews arrived quickly. Police, paramedics, and firefighters rushed to the scene, but there was nothing they could do. Both Kestaj and Anna died instantly. The fire made identification extremely difficult. Authorities first confirmed Kestaj's identity through documents and a distinctive gold watch found near the driver's seat. The female passenger's body was severely damaged by the blaze. Around the same time, Swiss police received a missing persons report from Anna's friends. She had told them she was heading to Italy and then went silent. DNA testing and personal items, including a gold watch she frequently wore in social media photos, confirmed what her friends already feared. Investigators found no evidence of mechanical failure, road hazards, or outside interference. The cause appeared to be speed alone. Kestaj was well known across Europe's club scene, performing in countries from Germany to Albania and even the United States. Though he lived in Switzerland, his wife and two children remained in Kosovo. His brother later described him as a devoted father and loving sibling. Anna, originally from Odessa, Ukraine, had built a modeling career in Switzerland and shared her life openly online. Friends said she had been rebuilding her future and was full of plans. In a matter of seconds, everything ended. Authorities shut down the highway for hours as debris from the Ferrari was collected from the road and nearby fields. Every fragment was examined. No foul play, no conspiracy, just raw speed and a machine that could not forgive a single mistake. A luxury car built for performance. A straight stretch of highway. One moment of lost control. And in an instant, 2 lives were gone. Sophia Naismith. June 22, 2019. A quiet Saturday night in Glengarry, a suburb of Adelaide, South Australia. 15-year-old Sophia Naismith was walking along Morfett Road with her best friend Jordan Kalia. It was just before 10 p.m. The girls were near the House of Chow restaurant, talking, laughing, doing what teenagers do on an ordinary evening. Then headlights swerved. A white Lamborghini Huracan suddenly veered off the road, mounted the curb, and plowed into the 2 girls before crashing into the front of the restaurant. The impact was devastating and immediate. Sophia was killed at the scene. Jordan was seriously injured and rushed to Flinders Medical Center. Behind the wheel was 37-year-old Alexander Campbell. He had owned the Lamborghini, valued at around $330,000, for only 4 months. The car bore custom plates reading Psycho. That night, investigators confirmed the vehicle was in sports mode, a setting that increases power and disables key safety systems, including electronic stability control. Prosecutors later argued that Campbell understood exactly what that meant. In a high-powered supercar on a cold road at night, disabling those systems significantly reduced the margin for error. Evidence suggested he had already lost control earlier in the drive. The community was shaken. Sophia was a student at Brighton Secondary School, known for her kindness, determination, and school spirit. She was a talented volleyball player and had been selected to represent South Australia at a national tournament scheduled just weeks later. Her parents, Pia and Luke Naismith, described her as vibrant and full of promise. Nearly 2,000 people attended a public memorial. Flowers and handwritten notes covered the crash site. From her hospital bed, Jordan posted a tribute to Sophia online, writing that her friend would be forever loved and never forgotten. Campbell was charged with causing death by dangerous driving. But in a judge-alone trial 3 years later, he was found not guilty of that charge. The court ruled it had not been proven beyond reasonable doubt that he had driven dangerously in a criminal sense. Instead, he pleaded guilty to aggravated driving without due care. In February 2021, he received a suspended sentence of 4 months and 27 days along with community service and an 18-month good behavior bond. His license was suspended for 4 years and 4 months. There was no prison time. Outside the courtroom, Sophia's mother called the sentence sickening. Her father said they would focus on changing the law, and they did. In the years that followed, South Australia introduced reforms known as Sophia's Law. The changes included fines of up to $5,000 for disabling safety features in high-performance vehicles and created new offenses for causing harm or death through careless driving, carrying potential prison terms of up to 7 years. Police were also granted greater authority to suspend licenses on the spot, and new licensing requirements for ultra-high-powered vehicles were introduced. In 2023, Volleyball SA launched the Sophia Naismith SA Spirit Award, honoring young athletes who demonstrate compassion, teamwork, and dedication. Her parents personally presented the first award. Sophia's life ended in seconds because of decisions made inside a machine built for speed. The justice system could not fully undo what happened, but her family transformed tragedy into reform. A supercar left the road that night. A young life was lost. And an entire state was forced to rethink what responsibility means when power meets pavement. When power meets pavement. When power meets pavement. What if the most terrifying crash stories weren't accidents you forgot, but moments the world could never erase? These are the 8 most disturbing car crash deaths of all time. Tragedies so sudden, so violent, they shattered families, shook nations, and left questions that still echo years later. From rising stars frozen in youth to ordinary mornings turned catastrophic in seconds, each crash became more than a headline. They became haunting reminders that in a single heartbeat, metal can twist, flames can rise, and history can change forever. Jean-Claude Leonard. October 23, 2015 began as a quiet autumn morning in southwestern France. Jean-Claude Leonard, 73 years old, boarded a local bus with his wife and dozens of fellow retirees from the small village of Petit Palais-et-Cournon. They were members of a senior citizens club setting out on what was meant to be a short scenic trip through the vineyards near Puisséguin. Many on board were lifelong friends. Some were married couples who had spent decades side by side. It was an ordinary outing, simple and familiar, the kind of day that carried no hint of danger. Only minutes into the journey, as the bus traveled along the narrow, winding departmental road D17 near Puisséguin, a logging truck approached from the opposite direction. The truck was driven by 30-year-old Cyril Alexander with his 3-year-old son inside the cab. The vehicle was hauling timber and gasoline for chainsaws stored in an external tank. As it entered a sharp curve, the truck appeared to lose control. It jackknifed across the road and collided head-on with the bus. The force of the crash ruptured the truck's fuel tank. Gasoline spilled onto the roadway and quickly spread beneath the bus. Within seconds, sparks ignited the fuel. Flames engulfed both vehicles almost immediately. Survivors later described how rapidly the fire spread, how plastic interior panels melted and thick smoke filled the cabin. Many passengers were elderly and had limited mobility. Escape routes became blocked by heat and chaos. Jean-Claude Leonard and his wife had just fastened their seatbelts when the impact occurred. He managed to unbuckle them and guide her toward an emergency exit. Once outside, he realized that most of their friends were still trapped inside the burning bus. Ignoring the growing danger, Jean-Claude ran back toward the flames. Together with another driver, he pulled 2 passengers free before the heat and smoke forced them back. The tires exploded under extreme temperatures, and the bus was soon reduced to a charred shell. Out of 50 people aboard the bus, only 8 survived. 41 passengers died in the fire. Cyril Alexander and his young son also lost their lives in the truck. In total, 43 people were killed, making it France's deadliest road accident in more than 30 years. The aftermath left an entire community grieving. Identification of the victims took weeks due to the condition of the remains. Investigations examined the dangerous bend in the road and raised broader concerns about fire safety and emergency preparedness in public transport. For Jean-Claude Leonard, survival came with the memory of a morning that began in peace and ended in devastation, a day that forever marked his village and everyone who lived through it. If you believe Jean-Claude Leonard's decision to run back into the flames was an act of true courage, comment yes below. If you think no one should ever risk their life that way, comment no. Hannah Immers. November 1st, 2016 began like any other quiet Tennessee morning in McMinn County. 17-year-old Hannah Immers was driving north on Interstate 75 after spending the night at a friend's house following a Halloween costume party. She left early, heading home before school, the highway stretching ahead in that pale blue light that makes everything feel ordinary and safe. Hannah was the oldest of 10 siblings in a blended family, a bright and driven young woman who had already earned her high school diploma at 15. She spoke multiple languages, loved music and acting, and had a passion for cosplay. More than that, she cared deeply about children with special needs, even learning sign language so she could communicate with them more meaningfully. Her future felt expansive, almost luminous. Somewhere along the interstate, her car drifted off course. She tried to correct it, steering back toward the roadway, but the vehicle swerved into the median and struck a guardrail known as the Lindsay X light. The device was designed to telescope inward during a crash, absorbing impact and reducing the force on the vehicle. Instead, according to crash findings, the guardrail failed to collapse as intended. The steel rail pierced through the driver's side door, striking Hannah in the head and chest, continuing through the interior before finally stopping. The car dragged the embedded metal roughly 15 to 20 feet before coming to rest. Hannah died instantly. In the passenger seat, her friend survived with only a minor cut, a stark and painful contrast that deepened the shock surrounding the crash. Her father, Steve Immers, was an EMT who had witnessed severe accidents throughout his career. Even with that experience, he struggled to understand how a crash that appeared survivable had turned fatal in seconds. 4 months later, grief gave way to disbelief when he received a letter from the Tennessee Department of Transportation addressed to Hannah. Inside was a bill for nearly $3,000 charging her for the replacement of the damaged guardrail. The notice felt mechanical and detached from the reality of what had happened on that stretch of highway. As Steve searched for answers, he discovered that just 1 week before Hannah's crash, Tennessee had removed the X light from its approved products list due to concerns about its performance at highway speeds. Despite that decision, more than 1,000 of the devices remained installed across the state. Reports indicated that at least 19 deaths nationwide had been linked to X-light guardrails, with allegations in several cases that the rails did not telescope properly, but instead penetrated vehicles. Steve began traveling extensively, logging over 20,000 miles across more than 15 states to inspect X-light installations himself. He reported finding numerous examples of damaged or improperly installed units. In North Carolina alone, he examined more than 200 and claimed nearly all showed serious issues. Tennessee began removing the guardrails from roads with speed limits above 45 miles per hour, while other states moved more slowly, citing the multi-million-dollar cost of replacement. Further concerns emerged about how some highway safety devices were tested. A 2016 government report described a serious conflict of interest in cases where private laboratories conducting safety tests were owned by the same manufacturers producing the equipment. The X-light had been tested by a lab owned by its maker. Advocacy efforts by families, including Steve, contributed to a rule added to the 2021 federal infrastructure bill requiring independent testing of highway safety hardware. For Hannah's family, the reform came years after her death. Other families affected by similar crashes filed lawsuits. In one Tennessee case, Lauren Budd and her stepbrother Jacob Davidson died in an incident involving an X-light guardrail, and their family later reached a settlement. Steve also filed suit against Lindsay, the manufacturer, which denied responsibility and suggested the specific rail may not have been built by them. Steve has continued to speak publicly, support other grieving families, and press for accountability and roadway safety improvements. Hannah was laid to rest days after the crash. She is remembered by her family as intelligent, compassionate, and full of promise. Her story became part of a larger national debate over infrastructure safety testing standards and oversight. What happened on Interstate 75 transformed one family's life and helped bring scrutiny to a product that was meant to protect drivers on America's highways. Asherie Ryan and Nicole Lorraine Linton. August 4th, 2022 was an ordinary summer afternoon in Windsor Hills, Los Angeles. Around 1:30 p.m., traffic moved steadily through the busy intersection of La Brea Avenue and Slauson Avenue. Among the drivers was 23-year-old Asherie Ryan. She was on her way to a prenatal appointment, a routine visit filled with anticipation. In the car with her were her boyfriend, 24-year-old Reynold Lester, their 11-month-old son, Alonso Quintero, and the child she was carrying, a baby boy they planned to name Armani. It was a short drive, a familiar route, one more small step toward a growing future. At the same time, 37-year-old Nicole Lorraine Linton, a traveling nurse from Houston, Texas, was approaching the same intersection in a black Mercedes-Benz. Surveillance footage later showed her vehicle traveling at approximately 130 miles per hour in a 35-mile-per-hour zone. The traffic light had been red for about 15 seconds when her car entered the intersection. Data from the vehicle indicated that the accelerator pedal had been fully depressed for several seconds before impact, with the speed increasing from roughly 122 to 130 miles per hour at the moment of collision. The Mercedes slammed into Asherie Ryan's Jaguar with immense force. The impact split the vehicle in half and ignited a fire that quickly spread to other cars. In total, 9 vehicles were involved in the crash. Witnesses described a loud explosion-like sound and a sudden wall of flames stretching across the roadway. Asherie Ryan, Reynold Lester, Alonso Quintero, and unborn baby Armani were killed instantly. 2 additional women in another vehicle, 43-year-old Nathasia Lewis and 38-year-old Lynette Noble, also lost their lives. 6 people died within seconds. Nicole Linton survived with moderate injuries and was arrested at the scene. She was charged with multiple counts, including murder and vehicular manslaughter, and has been held without bail. Prosecutors argued that the evidence showed deliberate acceleration and awareness, citing surveillance video and vehicle data. Her defense attorney stated that she may have experienced a medical or mental health episode that caused her to lose awareness of her actions. It was disclosed that she had a history of mental health struggles and had been involved in a prior crash in 2020 where someone was injured. Investigators also revealed that she had searched online phrases such as, "Can you see your death coming?" days before the incident. In the year following the crash, a memorial known as the Slauson 6 Memorial was established at the intersection. It includes a bench, a garden, photographs of the victims, and an ultrasound image of baby Armani. Community members gathered on the first anniversary to release white doves in remembrance. Local officials initiated traffic studies and safety improvements in response to public concern. As legal proceedings continue, the crash remains one of the most devastating traffic incidents in Los Angeles in recent years. What occurred in a matter of seconds at a busy intersection permanently altered multiple families and left a lasting mark on the Windsor Hills community. If you believe justice must be fully served in the case of Asherie Ryan and the Slauson 6, hit like and comment 1 below to stand with the families who are still waiting for answers. Gracie Machado Brooklyn. Triplet, Austin Holt, Madison Robertson, Addison Gratz, and Memory Wilson. On March 22, 2022, in the small town of Tishomingo, Oklahoma, 6 teenage girls left their high school campus during their lunch break. It was an ordinary midday moment in a town of just over 3,000 people where everyone knew each other and routines rarely changed. Packed into a 2015 Chevy Spark built for 4 passengers were Gracie Machado Brooklyn Triplet, Austin Holt, Madison Robertson, Addison A.J. Gratz, and Memory Wilson. They were between 15 and 17 years old. They were close friends. They were simply going for a short drive. Less than an hour later, all 6 were gone. The crash occurred at a location locals call the Y, where Oklahoma State Highway 22 meets U.S. Highway 377. The intersection is shaped by a sharp curve and limited visibility, a design that residents had long described as dangerous and confusing. Around 12:30 p.m., the girls were traveling east on Highway 22. They stopped at the sign and began turning onto US 377. At that same moment, a large rock-hauling semi-truck driven by 51-year-old Valentin Burton was approaching along the highway. Burton, a grandfather and volunteer firefighter, was wearing his seatbelt and was not injured. According to investigators, he was unable to stop in time. The truck struck the Chevy Spark on its side and pushed the small vehicle nearly 300 feet. The impact crushed the car. Emergency responders arrived to find it torn apart. Only the 2 front seat occupants were wearing seatbelts. 4 of the girls, including the 16-year-old driver, died at the scene. The remaining 2 were transported to a hospital where they later succumbed to their injuries. The names of the victims quickly spread throughout Tishomingo. Gracie Machado was remembered by her sister as a best friend. Brooklyn Triplet was known as a cheerleader and softball player described as loyal and kind. Austin Holt was active in the Future Farmers of America and proudly showed prize hogs at local events. Madison Robertson's family called her a beautiful soul. Addison Gratz was deeply cherished by her grandfather. Memory Wilson was a young mother with a small daughter who depended on her. Photos from the scene showed the Chevy Spark completely destroyed, a pink steering wheel cover still visible inside the wreckage. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol confirmed the crash happened just beyond a 90-degree curve on US 377. No criminal charges were filed against the truck driver. Investigations by state authorities and the National Transportation Safety Board followed, examining road design, visibility, and contributing factors. Safety experts noted that crash risk increases significantly when teen drivers carry multiple underage passengers. Research indicates that even one additional teen passenger raises the likelihood of a crash, and the risk grows with each added passenger. Seatbelt use was also a concern, particularly because Oklahoma law does not require backseat passengers over the age of 7 to wear one. The tragedy devastated the town. Signs reading "Tishomingo Strong" appeared throughout the community. Classes resumed with counselors available for grieving students. A candlelight vigil was held on the school's football field. Country singer Blake Shelton, who owns property nearby and had previously lost his own brother in a crash, shared condolences, reflecting the heartbreak felt across the region. For Tishomingo, March 22, 2022 marked a day that permanently changed the community. 6 teenage lives ended within moments at an intersection many had long considered hazardous. The investigation continued, but the loss remained immediate and deeply personal for a town struggling to move forward. George Russell Weller. On July 16, 2003, the weekly farmers market in Santa Monica, California was in full swing along Arizona Avenue. The street had been closed to traffic, and thousands of people moved between vendor stalls selecting fresh produce, flowers, and baked goods. Families pushed strollers, elderly couples browsed tables, tourists paused to take photos. Nearly 9,000 people were expected that afternoon. It was a routine community event, lively and orderly, protected by barricades designed to keep vehicles out. At approximately 1:47 p.m., 86-year-old George Russell Weller was driving his 1992 Buick LeSabre westbound on Arizona Avenue. As he approached the intersection near the market, his vehicle first struck a 2003 Mercedes-Benz stopped at a crosswalk. Instead of stopping, the Buick accelerated. Witnesses reported that Weller drove around the temporary barricades and entered the crowded market area. Over the next 15 to 20 seconds, the car traveled nearly 1,000 feet through the vendor-lined street at speeds estimated between 40 and 60 miles per hour, with some estimates higher. The vehicle plowed through tables and stalls, striking dozens of pedestrians. Some victims were thrown into the air. Others were pinned beneath the car or crushed against market stands. The chaos unfolded rapidly, leaving little time for people to react. The car finally came to a stop after a pedestrian landed on the windshield, obstructing the driver's view. A nearby police officer on bicycle patrol pulled Weller from the vehicle. 10 people were killed, including a 3-year-old girl. More than 70 others were injured, some critically. 2 of the most severely hurt victims were toddlers. Emergency responders covered parts of the scene with tarps as helicopters filmed from above. Witnesses described confusion and disbelief. One woman was found alive beneath the vehicle, and bystanders worked together to lift the car until first responders arrived. Weller was transported to a hospital for testing. Authorities confirmed that there were no drugs or alcohol in his system. He later stated that he had accidentally pressed the accelerator instead of the brake and panicked when he realized his mistake. Investigators examined the vehicle and found no evidence of mechanical failure. Despite the scale of the tragedy, Weller was not arrested at the scene. Officials cited his age, lack of flight risk, and cooperation. Ultimately, he was never criminally charged. In the years that followed, more than 30 civil lawsuits were filed by victims and their families. By 2008, the city of Santa Monica had paid approximately $21 million in settlements. Questions were raised about elderly driver oversight and prior warnings regarding traffic safety at the market location. 3 years before the crash, a police officer had reportedly expressed concern that the market's layout could pose a risk. After the incident, the city installed stronger permanent barriers at a cost of over $200,000 to prevent vehicles from entering the market space. George Russell Weller lived under full-time care until his death on December 9, 2010 at the age of 94. For the victims and survivors, the events of that afternoon left lasting physical and emotional scars. What began as a normal summer day at a community market ended in one of the most devastating pedestrian crashes in California history. Princess Diana, August 31, 1997, Paris after midnight. For the world she was the people's princess, luminous, compassionate, forever surrounded by camera flashes and public adoration. Diana had transformed royalty into something human, something vulnerable. Even after her divorce from Prince Charles, she remained one of the most photographed women on Earth. Every movement documented, every relationship dissected, every smile analyzed as if it carried hidden meaning. That night, she was riding in the back seat of a black Mercedes-Benz S280, leaving the Ritz Hotel with Dodi Fayed. Outside, paparazzi waited in a swarm of flashing bulbs and roaring engines. The car sped away into the Paris night, entering the Pont de l'Alma tunnel along the Seine. Moments later, it was over. The Mercedes crashed into a pillar inside the tunnel at high speed. Dodi Fayed and the driver Henri Paul were pronounced dead at the scene. Diana was still alive when emergency responders arrived. She was transported to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, where surgeons fought for hours to save her. At 4 a.m., she was declared dead. She was 36 years old. The official French investigation later concluded that the crash was caused by excessive speed and the driver's impairment. Toxicology reports stated that Henri Paul had alcohol in his system, and the vehicle was estimated to be traveling far beyond the speed limit while attempting to evade pursuing photographers. Subsequent British investigations, including Operation Paget, supported the conclusion that it was a tragic accident. Yet the aftermath refused to stay simple. The world erupted in grief. Millions lined the streets of London during her funeral procession. Mountains of flowers covered the gates of Kensington Palace. Elton John's rewritten version of Candle in the Wind became an anthem of collective mourning. But alongside the sorrow came suspicion. Questions about the paparazzi, about security decisions, about what truly happened inside that tunnel circulated for years. Conspiracy theories spread globally, amplified by the scale of the loss and the aura that had always surrounded her life. Princess Diana's death was more than a car crash. It marked a cultural rupture, a moment when celebrity, media obsession, and monarchy collided under fluorescent tunnel lights. The investigation files closed, but the image remains frozen in public memory, flashing cameras, twisted metal, and a princess whose life ended in the very glare she had lived within for decades. Paul Walker. November 30th, 2013. Santa Clarita, California. Paul Walker was a face the world associated with speed. As one of the stars of the Fast and Furious franchise, he had built a career around high-performance cars, loyalty, and brotherhood. Off-screen, he was known for his charity work and quiet personality, often described as grounded despite global fame. That afternoon, he had attended a charity event for Reach Out Worldwide, the disaster relief organization he founded. It was meant to be a brief appearance before returning to filming. After the event, Walker left as a passenger in a red 2005 Porsche Carrera GT driven by his friend and business associate Roger Rodas. Minutes later, on a stretch of Hercules Street, the car accelerated. According to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, the vehicle was traveling at a speed estimated between 80 and 93 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. The driver lost control. The Porsche struck a light pole and several trees before bursting into flames. The impact and fire were catastrophic. Both Walker and Rodas died at the scene. Investigators later determined that speed was the primary cause of the crash, with no evidence of mechanical failure. Toxicology reports found no drugs or alcohol in Walker's system. The Carrera GT, known for its powerful engine and demanding handling characteristics, became part of the broader public conversation about performance vehicles and safety. News of his death spread rapidly across social media and global news outlets. Fans gathered at the crash site, leaving flowers, candles, and handwritten messages. Production on Furious 7 was halted as the cast and crew mourned. The film was later completed using a combination of visual effects and the involvement of Walker's brothers to finish his remaining scenes. When it premiered in 2015, the final tribute sequence became one of the most emotional moments in franchise history, closing with the line that echoed far beyond the screen for Paul. In the years that followed, legal actions were filed against Porsche by Walker's daughter and Rotus's widow, raising questions about vehicle design and crash safety. Some cases were eventually settled. Official findings, however, maintained that excessive speed was the decisive factor. Paul Walker's death carried a striking irony, an actor synonymous with cinematic street racing losing his life in a real-world crash. Yet for those who knew him, the loss extended beyond the headlines and horsepower. It marked the sudden end of a life still deeply active in family philanthropy and film. A single afternoon drive transformed into a permanent chapter in Hollywood history, forever linking his name not only to speed on screen, but to the fragility that exists beyond it. If Paul Walker's legacy still lives in your heart, take a moment and comment "Amen" below in his memory. James Dean. September 30th, 1955 began like a scene already written for the screen. James Dean was 24 years old, standing at the edge of superstardom. East of Eden had introduced him to audiences as a brooding new force in Hollywood, and Rebel Without a Cause was about to premiere a film that would define a generation. He wasn't just an actor, he was becoming a symbol youth wrapped in defiance, vulnerability, masked by cool detachment. Fame was rising fast, but so was his appetite for speed. Dean loved racing. It wasn't a publicity stunt or a casual thrill, it was serious technical personal. That afternoon, he was driving his silver Porsche 550 Spider to Salinas for a sports car race. The car was lightweight, powerful, and notoriously unforgiving. He had nicknamed it Little Bastard, a name painted in red script across its body. Days earlier, actor Alec Guinness reportedly told Dean the car looked dangerous and urged him not to drive it, a comment that would later feel haunting in hindsight. At approximately 5:45 p.m. near the rural junction of California Highways 46 and 41 in Cholum, Dean's Porsche approached an intersection. A 1950 Ford Tudor driven by 23-year-old Donald Turnipseed was traveling in the opposite direction. Turnipseed began making a left turn across the highway. According to the official investigation, he later said he did not see the low-profile Porsche in time. The vehicles collided nearly head-on. The impact was catastrophic. The lightweight Spider absorbed the full force. Dean suffered severe internal injuries and a broken neck. He was transported by ambulance to a hospital in Paso Robles but was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. His passenger, German mechanic Rolf Wutherich, survived with serious injuries. Turnipseed sustained minor injuries and was not criminally charged. Investigators concluded that the crash resulted from Turnipseed's failure to yield with speed, considered a contributing factor, though estimates of Dean's exact speed have varied over the decades. News of Dean's death spread rapidly across the United States. He had completed only 3 major films. Rebel Without a Cause premiered less than a month later, and audiences watched a young man wrestle with alienation and identity, unaware that the actor portraying that restless energy was already gone. The tragedy transformed him instantly from rising star to cultural legend. His image, red jacket, intense gaze, cigarette between fingers, became permanent, untouched by time. In the years that followed, stories surrounding the wreckage of the Porsche fueled further fascination. Parts of the car were reportedly sold, and accounts circulated of subsequent accidents involving those components. Whether coincidence or embellishment, the mythology deepened, reinforcing the aura that had always surrounded him. James Dean's life ended on a quiet stretch of California highway, but his legacy only intensified. Frozen at 24, he remains one of Hollywood's most enduring icons, a symbol of brilliance interrupted, of promise suspended, and of a single collision that ensured he would never grow old in the public eye. 8 crashes, 8 moments that changed history forever. If these stories stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. This channel uncovers the truths behind the headlines and the stories the world still can't forget. Still can't forget. Paul Walker. November 30th, 2013. Santa Clarita, California. Paul Walker was a face the world associated with speed. As one of the stars of the Fast and Furious franchise, he had built a career around high-performance cars, loyalty, and brotherhood. Off-screen, he was known for his charity work and quiet personality, often described as grounded despite global fame. That afternoon, he had attended a charity event for Reach Out Worldwide, the disaster relief organization he founded. It was meant to be a brief appearance before returning to filming. After the event, Walker left as a passenger in a red 2005 Porsche Carrera GT driven by his friend and business associate Roger Rodas. Minutes later, on a stretch of Hercules Street, the car accelerated. According to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, the vehicle was traveling at a speed estimated between 80 and 93 miles per hour in a 45 mile per hour zone. The driver lost control. The Porsche struck a light pole and several trees before bursting into flames. The impact and fire were catastrophic. Both Walker and Rodas died at the scene. Investigators later determined that speed was the primary cause of the crash, with no evidence of mechanical failure. Toxicology reports found no drugs or alcohol in Walker's system. The Carrera GT, known for its powerful engine and demanding handling characteristics, became part of the broader public conversation about performance vehicles and safety. News of his death spread rapidly across social media and global news outlets. Fans gathered at the crash site, leaving flowers, candles, and handwritten messages. Production on Furious 7 was halted as the cast and crew mourned. The film was later completed using a combination of visual effects and the involvement of Walker's brothers to finish his remaining scenes. When it premiered in 2015, the final tribute sequence became one of the most emotional moments in franchise history, closing with the line that echoed far beyond the screen for Paul. In the years that followed, legal actions were filed against Porsche by Walker's daughter and Rodas's widow, raising questions about vehicle design and crash safety. Some cases were eventually settled. Official findings, however, maintained that excessive speed was the decisive factor. Paul Walker's death carried a striking irony, an actor synonymous with cinematic street racing losing his life in a real-world crash. Yet for those who knew him, the loss extended beyond the headlines and horsepower. It marked the sudden end of a life still deeply active in family philanthropy and film. A single afternoon drive transformed into a permanent chapter in Hollywood history, forever linking his name not only to speed on screen, but to the fragility that exists beyond it. If Paul Walker's legacy still lives in your heart, take a moment and comment "Amen" below in his memory. What if the most shocking Hollywood endings didn't happen on screen but on the highway behind the fame? The flashing cameras and the million-dollar smiles were 9 devastating crashes that turned legends into headlines overnight. These aren't just accidents, they're violent, sudden, and deeply unsettling tragedies that left fans speechless and families shattered. From royalty to rock stars, from racing icons to red carpet royalty, these are the 9 most disturbing celebrity deaths in car accident stories, where speed, fate, and a single moment changed everything forever. Sam Kinison. Sam Kinison did not walk onto a stage, he stormed it. In the 1980s, his voice was not merely heard, it detonated. A former Pentecostal preacher turned outlaw comic, he carried the rhythm of the pulpit into smoky clubs and HBO specials, screaming punchlines like sermons delivered from the edge of chaos. Audiences were shocked, offended, electrified, and they kept coming back. Behind the leather jackets and wild-eyed intensity was a man who had wrestled with faith addiction and excess, living as loudly offstage as he did beneath the spotlight. But by 1992, those close to him said something had shifted. He had married 26-year-old dancer Malika Sawiri, cut back on drinking and drugs, and signed new film deals. It was supposed to be a new chapter, calmer, steadier, almost hopeful. On April 10, 1992, just weeks after his honeymoon, Sam climbed into his white Pontiac Turbo Trans Am and began the drive from California to Laughlin, Nevada, where he was scheduled to perform. The desert highway stretched ahead, long, empty, deceptively peaceful. Following behind him were friends who would later witness the unthinkable. At the same time, a Chevrolet pickup truck carrying a group of teenagers sped along US Highway 95. The 17-year-old driver, Troy Pearson, had been drinking. Beer cans rattled in the truck as it swerved recklessly across lanes of traffic. Roughly 30 miles from Sam's destination, the pickup crossed into oncoming traffic. There was no time. The collision was head-on metal, folding into metal glass, exploding into air, thick with dust and shock. Both vehicles were crushed. Astonishingly, Sam initially appeared conscious. He climbed from the wreckage with only visible cuts and minor wounds. Friends rushed to him, urging him to lie down, but he seemed dazed, pacing, speaking softly as if in conversation with someone unseen. "I don't want to die," he reportedly said, his voice trembling. Then, after a pause, "But why?" Moments later, as if responding to an answer only he could hear, he whispered, "Okay, okay, okay," and collapsed. The injuries inside his body told a different story than the surface suggested. His head had struck the windshield. He had not been wearing a seatbelt. An autopsy later revealed catastrophic internal trauma, a torn aorta, a dislocated spine, injuries no one could survive. He died shortly after. His wife survived with minor injuries, released from the hospital the next day, though the emotional devastation would linger far longer than physical scars. Pearson was charged with vehicular manslaughter due to gross negligence. He pleaded guilty and received probation, 300 hours of community service, and a 2-year license suspension. Officially, it was a tragic accident caused by reckless driving and alcohol. The desert reclaimed its silence. Sam Kinison was buried in Tulsa, Oklahoma, his gravestone reading, "In another time and place, he would have been called a prophet." And perhaps that is what lingers most, not just the crash, not just the scream that once shook comedy itself, but those final words on the highway spoken into empty desert air and the mystery of who or what answered him back. Anna Heche. Anna Heche was never simply a Hollywood actress. She was a flicker of defiance in an industry that often punishes those who refuse to play by its rules. Rising to fame in the late 80s and 90s through Another World Volcano, Wag the Dog, in 6 Days, 7 Nights, she carried herself with a luminous confidence that felt almost battle-tested. Her public relationship with Ellen DeGeneres at a time when Hollywood was far less tolerant cost her roles and studio support, yet she stood firm, a smile built like armor. Behind that smile, however, were chapters of struggle, resilience, and a woman who had learned to survive heat long before the flames ever found her. On the morning of August 5th, 2022, in Los Angeles' quiet Mar Vista neighborhood, something shifted. Just after 11 a.m., Anne was driving her blue Mini Cooper along Walgrove Avenue when, according to witnesses, the car sped through the residential street at nearly 80 miles per hour in a 25 miles per hour zone. Then came the impact, violent, abrupt, unforgiving. The vehicle slammed into a home and instantly erupted into a towering blaze. The crash did not whisper, it roared. Flames consumed the car and heavily damaged the house, trapping Anne inside as smoke billowed into the California sky. Firefighters arrived swiftly, but the inferno resisted them. Structural damage, extreme heat, and thick smoke turned the rescue into a desperate battle against time. Nearly 30 minutes passed before she was pulled from the wreckage, 30 minutes inside a burning vehicle. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition and later transferred to the Grossman Burn Center in West Hills. Doctors documented severe second-degree burns across 12% of her body, face, neck, shoulders, chest, along with first-degree burns over 40% and a fractured sternum from the collision. Despite skin grafts, intensive treatment, and relentless medical effort, she never regained consciousness. 6 days later, on August 11th, Anne Heche was declared brain-dead, legally dead under California law. Her heart continued to beat temporarily as her family honored her long-expressed wish to donate her organs through the One Legacy Foundation. Tributes poured in across Hollywood, colleagues recalling her talent and the private pain she had endured with public grace. Her son Homer spoke of unbearable emotional swings during those 6 days, hope rising, then collapsing into silence. The coroner ruled her death an accident caused by inhalation and thermal injuries along with blunt force trauma. Toxicology reports noted certain substances in her system, though authorities clarified at least one was administered in the hospital for pain relief and concluded she was not under the influence at the time of the crash. Officially, the story is complete: a speeding car, a devastating fire, a tragic end. For Anne Heche, if you believe she's finally at peace, free from pain and fire, comment amen below and send her light. Lisa Lopes. Some artists chase fame. Lisa Left Eye Lopes seemed to challenge it, daring it to keep up. As the sharp-edged visionary within TLC, she wasn't just part of the harmony, she was the spark that made it dangerous. In the 1990s, TLC dominated airwaves with cultural-defining hits, and Lisa's rapid-fire versus fearless style and unapologetic intensity became inseparable from the group's identity. She wore rebellion like jewelry, turning controversy into currency. Yet beneath the platinum records and bold persona was a woman marked by turbulence, a painful childhood, public struggles, and a fiery relationship with NFL player Andre Rison that once erupted into headlines when anger and heartbreak collided. By 2002, something inside her appeared to be shifting. She traveled to Honduras seeking spiritual clarity, distancing herself from the noise of celebrity. There, surrounded by jungle air and long stretches of silence, she fasted, meditated, and adopted an alkaline diet influenced by Dr. Sebi. She recorded her thoughts, constantly speaking into a handheld camera about destiny, energy, life, and death, reflections that now feel haunting in retrospect. Weeks earlier, tragedy had brushed close. A 10-year-old boy named Byron Fuentes was fatally struck by a vehicle she was riding in. The coincidence that he shared her last name, Lopes, unsettled her deeply. According to those present, Lisa began expressing a belief that a spirit intended for her had mistakenly taken the boy instead. Whether symbolic grief or genuine premonition, the idea lingered in her words. On April 25, 2002, Lisa was driving a rented Mitsubishi Montero near La Ceiba, filming more material for what would later become the documentary The Last Days of Left Eye. 8 people were inside the SUV. Reports indicate she swerved to avoid a truck that had stopped suddenly ahead. The vehicle veered off the road and flipped multiple times. Lisa, not wearing a seatbelt, was ejected. She suffered fatal injuries to her head and chest. Of all the passengers, she was the only one who died. Authorities concluded the crash resulted from excessive speed and loss of control. Alcohol and illegal substances were ruled out. Officially, it was a tragic accident on a rural road. Yet the timing, her recorded reflections about mortality, and the earlier fatal incident involving the young boy created an atmosphere that felt heavier than coincidence. Her mother later filed a lawsuit alleging the vehicle was prone to rollovers, though the broader narrative remained unchanged. TLC carried on honoring her legacy, but the absence was unmistakable. Lisa Lopes left behind music that still pulses with life and footage filled with questions. In the quiet heat of Honduras, far from the arenas that once echoed her voice, her journey ended abruptly. And to this day, some still revisit her final recordings and wonder, was it merely a sudden turn of the wheel, or had Lisa been sensing the curve in the road long before anyone else saw it? Diana, Princess of Wales. There are women who marry into royalty, and then there was Diana who transformed it. She was not merely the Princess of Wales, she became the people's princess, a figure who stepped beyond palace gates and into hospital wards, minefields, and the hearts of millions. After her divorce from Prince Charles, she seemed to be redefining herself, freer, more independent, no longer confined to the rigid choreography of royal life. Her relationship with Dodi Al-Fayed was splashed across tabloids worldwide, painted as romance, rebellion, or renewal depending on who was telling the story. But behind the camera flashes, she was also a mother preparing to return to London to see her sons William and Harry after a summer away. On the night of August 30th, 1997, Diana and Dodi dined privately inside the Ritz Paris, a hotel owned by Dodi's father, Mohammed Al-Fayed. Outside, paparazzi swarmed like a relentless tide, waiting for a single photograph worth a fortune. Just after midnight, in an effort to avoid the press, the couple left through a rear exit. Behind the wheel of a black Mercedes-Benz S280 was Henry Paul, the hotel's acting head of security. With them was bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, the only occupant wearing a seatbelt. The plan was simple: slip away unnoticed. But within minutes, the quiet escape turned into a high-speed flight through the Paris streets. As photographers pursued them on motorcycles, the Mercedes accelerated, reportedly reaching extreme speeds before entering the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. At approximately 12:25 a.m., the vehicle lost control and slammed into a concrete pillar. The impact was catastrophic. Metal twisted, glass shattered. The world, unaware for a few seconds longer, stood on the brink of heartbreak. Henry Paul and Dodi Al-Fayed died at the scene. Diana was still alive, though gravely injured. A passing French doctor, Dr. Frédéric Mailliez, stopped to assist, unaware at first of who she was. Emergency responders worked urgently stabilizing her before transporting her to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital. Despite hours of surgery, the internal injuries were overwhelming, including a severe tear to a pulmonary vein. At 4 a.m. on August 31, 1997, Diana was pronounced dead at age 36. The announcement sent shockwaves across the globe. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Flowers formed oceans of grief. Two young princes, just 15 and 12, faced a loss that no title could shield them from. Investigations later concluded the crash was caused by reckless driving, the pursuit by paparazzi, and the intoxication of Henri Paul. Operation Heche, a British inquiry, reaffirmed that it was a tragic accident, and yet questions refused to fade. What if she had worn a seatbelt? What if the car had driven slower? What if they had never left the Ritz that night? In the years since, theories have surfaced and receded, but certainty remains elusive in the hearts of many. Princess Diana's life was lived under constant scrutiny, and even in death, mystery clings to her story like the flash of a camera that never quite turns off. For Diana, Princess of Wales, if you believe her legacy of love and compassion will never fade, comment 1 below. Cliff Burton. Some musicians follow the rhythm. Cliff Burton rewrote it. As the bassist of Metallica during their explosive rise in the mid-1980s, he was more than a background presence. He was the architect of depth beneath the distortion. With Master of Puppets, the band reached new creative heights, and many credited Burton's classical influences and fearless experimentation for pushing their sound beyond the limits of thrash metal. At just 24 years old, he was already being spoken of as a visionary, a quiet force whose talent burned steady beneath the chaos of fame. In September 1986, Metallica was touring Europe, riding the momentum of gold records and sold-out shows. After a performance in Sweden, the band boarded their tour bus heading toward Copenhagen in the early hours of September 27th. Fatigue hung in the air like invisible fog. Before turning in, Burton and guitarist Kirk Hammett played a simple card game to decide who would claim the more comfortable bunk. Burton drew the ace of spades. It was a small, almost trivial victory, one that would later feel haunting in its randomness. Around 7 a.m., disaster struck. The bus suddenly lost control on a rural Swedish road and skidded off the highway. The driver later claimed black ice caused the vehicle to slide before flipping violently. As the bus overturned, Burton was thrown through the window of his bunk. The massive vehicle landed on top of him. In the stunned silence that followed, the rest of the band scrambled outside into the cold morning air, confronted with a scene too brutal to comprehend. Attempts were made to lift the bus, but when a crane was brought in, it reportedly slipped, dropping the vehicle again. Whether Burton died instantly or in those chaotic moments after remains uncertain. Authorities found no evidence of alcohol or drugs, and the driver was ultimately cleared of wrongdoing. Officially, it was a tragic accident attributed to road conditions. Yet members of the band later admitted they searched the pavement for signs of black ice and found none, leaving a question mark that never quite disappeared. Grief fractured them. James Hetfield reportedly walked for miles in shock and anger, while the others struggled to accept that the quiet genius who shaped their sound was suddenly gone. Metallica chose to continue, later hiring Jason Newsted and releasing And Justice for All in 1988, an album many heard as both evolution and elegy. Burton was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009, securing his place in music history. But among fans and bandmates alike, the memory of that Swedish dawn remains suspended in time. A bus overturned a career unfinished, a future rewritten in seconds. Grace Kelly. Before she became royalty, she was already untouchable. Grace Kelly emerged from 1950s Hollywood like a living sculpture, poised, luminous, impossibly composed. She won an Academy Award, worked with Hitchcock, and seemed destined to reign over cinema. Then, in a twist that felt scripted by fate itself, she left Hollywood behind to marry Prince Rainier III and become Princess of Monaco. The world watched the fairy tale unfold, the movie star who traded red carpets for palace balconies, applause for diplomacy. In Monaco, she became elegance embodied, a symbol of refinement and restraint, a woman who appeared to glide rather than walk. But fairy tales, as history often reminds us, carry shadows behind their shine. On September 13, 1982, Grace was driving her Rover 3500 down a narrow winding mountain road above Monaco. Beside her sat her youngest daughter, Princess Stephanie. The route was familiar, steep curves, dramatic cliffs, Mediterranean air rising from below. Then something went wrong. The car suddenly veered off the roadway, careened down a steep slope, and crashed. There were no skid marks reported that clearly explained a desperate attempt to brake. The vehicle tumbled before coming to rest among trees and rock. Official reports later stated that Grace had suffered a mild stroke while driving, causing her to lose control of the vehicle. She was rushed to the hospital in Monaco with severe head injuries. Princess Stephanie survived with fractures and bruises. The next day at age 52, Grace Kelly, Princess of Monaco, was pronounced dead after her family made the decision to remove her from life support. The world struggled to process it. A woman who had embodied composure and control had lost both on a curve she had likely driven countless times before. Rumors circulated quietly in the aftermath. Some whispered about the condition of the brakes. Others speculated whether Grace had truly been driving at the moment of impact. There were murmurs about conflicting early reports about unanswered technical details. None of it was ever formally proven. The official conclusion remained a tragic medical emergency, an accident on a mountain road. Her funeral at the Monaco Cathedral drew royalty celebrities and world leaders. The woman who once captivated the silver screen was laid to rest as a princess mourned by millions who had never met her but felt they had known her. Decades later, the image lingers, a winding road above the sea, a sudden silence where there should have been continuity. Was it simply a stroke that altered the course of a nation's icon? Or was there something about that final descent that history will never fully untangle? Thank you for staying with us in remembering Grace Kelly. If you're still here, still watching, still honoring her story, leave a 2 in the comments so we know you're with us. Paul Walker. He built a legacy on speed. On screen, Paul Walker wasn't just driving cars, he was redefining what velocity looked like in modern cinema. As Brian O'Connor in the Fast and Furious franchise, he became the calm center of chaos, the blue-eyed racer with loyalty in his bones and gasoline in his veins. Fame followed him, but unlike many stars, he carried it lightly. Friends described him as grounded private, more interested in the ocean and humanitarian work than Hollywood parties. He had the rare image of a man who seemed untouched by the excess around him. On November 30th, 2013, that image shattered in seconds. Walker had attended a charity event for Reach Out Worldwide in Santa Clarita, California. It was supposed to be a simple afternoon gathering fast cars fundraising friends. After the event, he climbed into the passenger seat of a silver 2005 Porsche Carrera GT driven by his longtime friend Roger Rodas. The car pulled away from the business park and onto Hercules Street. Moments later, it was traveling at high speed. Then came the loss of control. The Porsche spun, struck a concrete light pole and 2 trees and erupted into flames so intense that black smoke towered into the afternoon sky. Witnesses rushed forward but were forced back by the fire. The impact had been catastrophic. Both men were pronounced dead at the scene. The official investigation later concluded that excessive speed, estimated between 80 and 93 miles per hour in a 45 miles per hour zone, caused the crash. No alcohol or drugs were found in either man's system. The road conditions were dry. The vehicle showed no evidence of mechanical failure prior to impact. Yet the symbolism was impossible to ignore. A man whose career was built on precision driving died in a real-life high-performance machine known for its unforgiving nature. Lawsuits followed, including claims against Porsche alleging design flaws. The company maintained that the vehicle was safe when properly operated. The courts ultimately sided with Porsche, reinforcing the official narrative driver error and speed. But facts rarely quiet emotion. Fans gathered at the crash site, leaving candles, model cars, handwritten letters. Production on Furious 7 halted as the cast mourned. The film was later completed using stand-ins and digital effects, ending with a tribute that blurred the line between fiction and farewell. The final scene, 2 cars diverging on an open highway, felt less like cinema and more like a goodbye whispered to millions. Paul Walker was 40 years old. He left behind a daughter, Meadow, and a global audience who felt the loss personally. The investigation closed the case with clear conclusions. Still, there remains a haunting irony in the silence that followed the roar of an engine replaced by stillness. Selena Gomez. Before she became a legend, before the rhinestone bustiers and sold-out arenas, before the name Selena echoed like a promise across Texas and beyond, she was simply a teenage girl chasing a fragile dream along endless highways. Fame did not arrive wrapped in glitter. It came in the form of long road trips, second-hand equipment, modest motel rooms, and a family band determined to make something impossible feel inevitable. The road was her stage before the stage, and at one point it nearly became her final curtain. In the late 1980s, while traveling between performances with Selena y Los Dinos, the family vehicle was involved in a serious accident. It was not the kind of crash that dominates national headlines. It happened before the Grammys, before platinum records, before the world realized how brightly she would shine. But those close to the family later described the moment as terrifying: a sudden loss of control, tires skidding against unforgiving pavement, a vehicle veering off course in a split second that felt suspended in time. Metal jolted. Silence followed. For a fleeting, breathless instant, everything they had worked toward hung in uncertainty. Selena survived, her family survived, the music survived. What makes that near tragedy feel haunting in hindsight is the fragility of timing. She was still becoming herself, a young Mexican-American artist stepping into a male-dominated Tejano industry with a voice that blended innocence and fire. Her father believed with unshakable conviction that she was destined for greatness. Her siblings stood beside her under stage lights that flickered more often than they dazzled. They were building something brick by brick, melody by melody. And on that stretch of highway, it almost disappeared before it had the chance to fully take form. They didn't stop. They kept driving. They kept performing at fairs, quinceañeras, small-town festivals. The accident became a memory folded quietly into the family's story, a reminder of how quickly momentum can shatter. As the years passed, Selena's presence grew magnetic. Albums like Entre a mi Mundo and Amor Prohibido transformed her into the queen of Tejano, her voice weaving cultural pride with pop ambition. She spoke openly about crossing over into the English language market, about expanding beyond borders. The same highways that once threatened her future became the arteries through which her fame traveled. And then, years later, fate would return in a way no one could predict. Not with screeching tires, but with a moment that stunned the world into disbelief. Looking back, that early road accident feels almost symbolic, as if destiny had already tested her resilience once before. A warning, a rehearsal, or simply coincidence? History remembers her for the brilliance that followed. But somewhere in the archives of family memory lies that earlier curve in the road, the one that nearly rewrote everything before the world even had the chance to fall in love with her. Ayrton Senna. There are champions, and then there are men who seem to race against something unseen. Ayrton Senna was not merely a Formula One driver, he was intensity in human form. To Brazil, he was a symbol of national pride during uncertain times, a figure who carried the flag not just on his helmet but in his heartbeat. Three-time world champion, a master in the rain, a perfectionist who believed that racing was not only mechanical precision but spiritual alignment. When he spoke about God, about destiny, about the fine line between bravery and recklessness, it did not sound rehearsed. It sounded like confession. By 1994, Senna had left McLaren and joined Williams, the dominant team of the era. On paper, it was a powerful alliance. In reality, the season opened under tension. New regulations had banned electronic driver aids like traction control and active suspension systems that once stabilized the cars at extreme speeds. The new Williams FW16 was notoriously difficult to handle. Senna struggled in the opening races, retiring twice. For a driver of his caliber, it was more than frustration, it was a warning. Then came the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola. A weekend that felt cursed before the lights even went out. On Friday, Rubens Barrichello crashed violently during practice. On Saturday, Austrian driver Roland Ratzenberger was killed in a qualifying accident. The paddock fell into shock. Senna reportedly visited the crash site. He was visibly shaken. Some said he considered not racing. Others said he felt a responsibility to continue for the sport, for the fans, for something larger than himself. May 1st, 1994. Lap 7. Approaching the high-speed Tamburello corner, a section of track with minimal runoff and a concrete wall waiting beyond it, Senna's car suddenly failed to turn. At more than 200 kilometers per hour, the Williams shot straight ahead and slammed into the barrier. The impact was devastating. A suspension arm pierced his helmet. The race was stopped. Silence spread through living rooms across the world as cameras lingered on the motionless cockpit. He was airlifted to Bologna's Maggiore Hospital. Hours later, doctors announced that Ayrton Senna had died from catastrophic head injuries. He was 34 years old. The investigation that followed stretched over years. Data suggested that a modified steering column altered to improve cockpit comfort may have fractured, causing loss of control. Italian prosecutors charged key Williams engineers, including team principal Frank Williams and chief designer Adrian Newey. After lengthy court proceedings, all were ultimately cleared, the final ruling racing accident likely triggered by mechanical failure. But that legal conclusion did not quiet the deeper unease. Why was Tamburello still bordered by concrete at such speeds? Why had safety improvements lagged behind engineering ambition? Why did it take a weekend of 2 fatalities for the sport to change? Senna's death became a turning point. Formula One was forced into transformation, circuits were redesigned, runoff areas expanded, car structures reinforced, medical response protocols tightened. For more than 2 decades afterward, no driver would die during a Formula One race weekend, a silent testament to the cost of that day. In Brazil, millions lined the streets of Sao Paulo for his funeral. The procession resembled a state farewell. Grown men wept openly, flags waved. The nation mourned not only a champion, but a man who had made them believe that discipline and faith could conquer any curve, could conquer any curve, could conquer any curve. Selena Gomez. Before she became a legend, before the rhinestone bustiers and sold-out arenas, before the name Selena echoed like a promise across Texas and beyond, she was simply a teenage girl chasing a fragile dream along endless highways. Fame did not arrive wrapped in glitter. It came in the form of long road trips, second-hand equipment, modest motel rooms, and a family band determined to make something impossible feel inevitable. The road was her stage before the stage, and at one point it nearly became her final curtain. In the late 1980s, while traveling between performances with Selena y Los Dinos, the family vehicle was involved in a serious accident. It was not the kind of crash that dominates national headlines. It happened before the Grammys, before platinum records, before the world realized how brightly she would shine. But those close to the family later described the moment as terrifying, a sudden loss of control, tires skidding against unforgiving pavement, a vehicle veering off course in a split second that felt suspended in time. Metal jolted. Silence followed. For a fleeting, breathless instant, everything they had worked toward hung in uncertainty. Selena survived, her family survived, the music survived. What makes that near tragedy feel haunting in hindsight is the fragility of timing. She was still becoming herself, a young Mexican-American artist stepping into a male-dominated Tejano industry with a voice that blended innocence and fire. Her father believed with unshakable conviction that she was destined for greatness. Her siblings stood beside her under stage lights that flickered more often than they dazzled. They were building something brick by brick, melody by melody. And on that stretch of highway, it almost disappeared before it had the chance to fully take form. They didn't stop. They kept driving. They kept performing at fairs, quinceañeras, small-town festivals. The accident became a memory folded quietly into the family story, a reminder of how quickly momentum can shatter. As the years passed, Selena's presence grew magnetic. Albums like Entre a mi Mundo and Amor Prohibido transformed her into the Queen of Tejano, her voice weaving cultural pride with pop ambition. She spoke openly about crossing over into the English language market, about expanding beyond borders. The same highways that once threatened her future became the arteries through which her fame traveled. And then years later, fate would return in a way no one could predict. Not with screeching tires, but with a moment that stunned the world into disbelief. Looking back, that early road accident feels almost symbolic, as if destiny had already tested her resilience once before. A warning, a rehearsal, or simply coincidence? History remembers her for the brilliance that followed. But somewhere in the archives of family memory lies that earlier curve in the road, the one that nearly rewrote everything before the world even had the chance to fall in love with her. Air travel is often called the safest way to travel, but when something goes wrong in the sky, the results can be terrifying. Some plane crashes leave behind unanswered mysteries, while others reveal chilling details about the final moments before impact. In this video, we'll uncover 5 of the most disturbing plane crash deaths of all time, real stories of tragedy, fear, and the horrifying seconds passengers faced before disaster struck. Germanwings Flight 9525. On the morning of March 24, 2015, Germanwings Flight 9525 took off from Barcelona, Spain, bound for Dusseldorf, Germany. It was supposed to be an ordinary 2-hour flight. The Airbus A320 carried 150 passengers and crew, most of them returning home after vacations or family visits. Among them was 37-year-old Marina Bondarenko, a film editor from Manchester, traveling with her 7-month-old son, Julian. She had just attended a family funeral in Spain and was now heading back to England. Her husband was waiting for them, expecting a normal reunion later that day. But high above Europe, something terrifying was already unfolding. For the first half of the flight, everything appeared routine. The aircraft climbed smoothly to 38,000 feet, and at 9:30 a.m., the pilots made their final standard communication with air traffic control. Shortly afterward, Captain Patrick Sondenheimer stepped out of the cockpit for a short break, leaving the aircraft in the hands of the co-pilot Andreas Lubitz. The moment the cockpit door closed, Lubitz locked it from the inside. Then he quietly adjusted the flight controls, setting the aircraft on a controlled descent toward the French Alps. Emergency frequencies, yet no response came. Meanwhile, the captain returned to the cockpit and realized the door was locked. He knocked, then pounded harder, shouting for Lubitz to open it. The cockpit voice recorder later captured the desperate sounds of him trying to force the door open, while inside Lubitz sat calmly at the controls, breathing steadily. As the aircraft continued descending, automated warnings blared through the cockpit, terrain, pull up. The alarms screamed again and again, but Lubitz ignored them. Inside the cabin, passengers slowly realized something was wrong as the mountains rose rapidly outside the windows. Panic spread. Some began screaming as the plane dropped lower and lower toward the jagged alpine terrain. At 9:41 a.m., the Airbus A320 slammed into the mountainside at nearly 700 kilometers per hour. The impact obliterated the aircraft, scattering wreckage across the frozen slopes. All 150 people on board were killed instantly. When investigators recovered the black boxes, the truth shocked the world. Lubitz had deliberately flown the plane into the mountain. Later investigations revealed he had struggled with severe psychological problems and had even been advised not to fly shortly before the disaster information he had concealed from his employer. For the families left behind, the loss was immeasurable. Marina and her infant son were only 2 of the lives stolen that morning, each with a future that ended in seconds. In response to the tragedy, airlines around the world introduced new rules requiring at least 2 crew members to be present in the cockpit at all times. The change improved aviation safety, but for the victims of Flight 9525, it came too late. The crash remains one of the most chilling reminders that sometimes the greatest danger in the sky is not mechanical failure or bad weather, but the person trusted to fly the plane. Metrojet Flight 9268. On October 31st, 2015, Metrojet Flight 9268 departed from the resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, heading toward St. Petersburg, Russia. The Airbus A321 carried 224 people on board, most of them Russian tourists returning home after a vacation by the Red Sea. Families filled the cabin, children leaned against the windows watching the desert disappear below, and flight attendants moved through the aisles preparing for what should have been a routine 4-hour journey. Among the passengers was Darina Gromova, traveling with her parents Tatiana and Alexei. Just before boarding, Tatiana had posted a photo of her baby standing at the airport window gazing out at the runway. The caption read simply, "The main passenger." No one could have imagined how haunting that image would soon become. Only 23 minutes after takeoff, something catastrophic happened high above the Sinai Peninsula. The aircraft, cruising at around 33,000 feet, suddenly vanished from radar. There was no distress call, no warning, just silence. Moments later, the plane broke apart in midair, scattering wreckage across more than 20 square kilometers of desert. The impact left no survivors. It was one of the deadliest aviation disasters in Russian history, and investigators were immediately confronted with a disturbing mystery. How could a modern airliner simply disintegrate in the sky? As search teams combed the desert, a chilling discovery raised new questions. The body of baby Darina was found over 30 kilometers away from the main crash site, suggesting the aircraft had already begun breaking apart long before the final impact. Pieces of the fuselage showed small puncture holes with metal bent outward, a pattern that investigators recognized as the signature of an internal explosion. The aircraft's black box recordings captured unusual sounds just seconds before the plane was destroyed. Slowly, the horrifying possibility began to emerge. This was not an accident. Attention turned toward airport security at Sharm el-Sheikh, where concerns had previously been raised about possible lapses in screening procedures. Experts began to suspect that an explosive device had been smuggled onto the plane, possibly hidden inside luggage. Days later, a terrorist group linked to ISIS claimed responsibility for the attack, stating it was retaliation for Russia's military operations in Syria. Investigators later confirmed traces of foreign explosives in the wreckage, strongly supporting the theory that a bomb had detonated inside the aircraft. For the families of the victims, the loss was unbearable. Entire families had boarded that flight together, expecting to return home with vacation photos and memories. Instead, their stories ended in the desert sky above Sinai. The image of little Darina at the airport window quickly spread around the world, becoming the symbol of the tragedy. What was once a simple photo of a child excited for a trip home turned into a heartbreaking reminder of how suddenly ordinary lives can be destroyed. In the months that followed, thousands of people signed petitions calling for a memorial statue of Darina to be placed at St. Petersburg's airport, a sculpture of the little girl holding a toy airplane, looking toward the sky. The proposal sparked emotional debate, but the message behind it remained clear. The world would not forget the innocent lives lost that morning. Metrojet Flight 9268 became a grim reminder that even far above the clouds, hidden dangers can turn an ordinary journey into a devastating tragedy in a matter of seconds. Drop a comment below, telling us what time you're watching this video right now. Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243. On the morning of December 25, 2024, Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 departed from Baku, Azerbaijan, heading toward Grozny, Russia. On board the Embraer 190 were 67 people, 62 passengers, and 5 crew members. The flight was expected to be routine, even ordinary. Families were traveling for the holidays, passengers relaxed in their seats, and the experienced flight crew prepared for what should have been a normal journey across the region. For the first part of the flight, everything seemed calm. The aircraft climbed to more than 30,000 feet, cruising smoothly through cloudy skies. But as the plane approached Russian airspace, something suddenly went wrong. The aircraft's GPS navigation system abruptly stopped working, leaving the pilots without reliable positioning data. Later, experts suggested the signal may have been disrupted by military electronic jamming, which had been active in the region. The pilots attempted to continue the flight using alternative navigation methods and were cleared to approach Grozny Airport, but thick fog made landing impossible. After 2 failed landing attempts, the crew decided to turn back. Then the situation suddenly turned terrifying. About 80 minutes into the flight, a loud explosion shook the aircraft. Passengers screamed as fragments of metal tore through the fuselage. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling as the cabin filled with panic. Moments later, a second explosion ripped through the aircraft. Flight attendant Hakuma Aliva continued trying to calm passengers despite the chaos around her. Shrapnel had pierced parts of the plane, damaging critical systems and making control increasingly difficult. At first, the pilot suspected a bird strike, but the damage was far too severe. The aircraft struggled to stay airborne as it crossed the Caspian Sea toward Kazakhstan, where the crew hoped to make an emergency landing. The plane became unstable, losing altitude and speed unpredictably. As the pilots attempted their final approach toward Aktau Airport, disaster struck. Just 3 kilometers from the runway, the aircraft's right wing struck the ground. The plane flipped, broke apart, and burst into flames. Thick black smoke rose into the sky as rescuers rushed to the crash site. Of the 67 people on board, 38 were killed, including both pilots and a flight attendant. 29 people survived, many with severe injuries. As investigators examined the wreckage, disturbing evidence began to appear. Metal fragments consistent with surface-to-air missile shrapnel were found embedded in the aircraft's structure. Survivors had also reported hearing multiple explosions before the crash. Under growing international pressure, Russian authorities later acknowledged a tragic incident in the region and issued an apology, though responsibility remained controversial. Investigators concluded that the aircraft had likely been struck by a missile from an air defense system, turning a routine holiday flight into a deadly catastrophe in the sky. For the victims and their families, the events of that Christmas morning left scars that will never fully heal. What began as a simple journey across the Caspian ended in a disaster that reminded the world how quickly unseen dangers in conflict zones can turn an ordinary flight into tragedy. Juju Airflight 7C 2216. On December 29, 2024, Jeju Airflight 7C 2216 was on its way from Bangkok, Thailand to Muan International Airport in South Korea. The Boeing 737-800 carried 181 people, including vacationers returning home after the holidays, families traveling together, and foreign passengers. For most of them, the trip had been a joyful escape. They had spent days in Thailand enjoying beaches, food, and time with loved ones. The flight home was supposed to be the final step of a perfect vacation. Among the passengers was the Kang family. Kang Ko, a 43-year-old public relations officer for the Kia Tigers baseball team, was traveling with his 37-year-old wife Jin and their 3-year-old son Gu. It was their first family trip abroad, and they had been sharing happy photos online throughout the week. In one of the last pictures posted before boarding, their young son proudly held his first passport, smiling with excitement about the journey home. As the aircraft approached Muan Airport, something suddenly went wrong. Witnesses later reported seeing the plane strike a flock of birds, causing the right engine to fail. The aircraft struggled to maintain power as the pilots attempted to stabilize it for landing. Inside the cabin, most passengers had no idea how serious the situation was. One traveler managed to send a message to a family member saying, "A bird got stuck in the wing. We can't land." Moments later, another chilling message followed. Should I say my last words? It was the final communication from the aircraft. As the pilots attempted an emergency landing, the landing gear failed to deploy. The Boeing 737 touched down but immediately skidded across the runway, unable to slow down. Within seconds, the aircraft slammed into a concrete barrier at the end of the runway. The impact triggered a massive explosion, and the plane was quickly engulfed in flames. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, but the destruction was catastrophic. Of the 181 people on board, 179 were killed. Only 2 cabin crew members survived, both critically injured. Entire families were wiped out in an instant, including the Kang family, whose joyful vacation photos now served as painful reminders of their final days together. Across South Korea, communities fell into mourning. In some villages where many victims lived, neighbors described heartbreaking scenes of empty homes and grieving relatives waiting for news that would never bring their loved ones back. What had begun as a simple return flight from a holiday paradise ended as one of the worst aviation disasters in South Korea's history, leaving behind shattered families and unanswered questions about the final moments of Flight 7C2216. Helios Airways Flight 522. On the morning of August 14, 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522 departed from Larnaca, Cyprus, heading to Prague with a scheduled stop in Athens, Greece. On board the Boeing 737 were 121 people, including families, tourists, and children returning from summer holidays. The flight began like any other. Passengers settled into their seats while the aircraft climbed steadily into the clear Mediterranean sky. No one inside the cabin knew that a silent and deadly problem had already begun. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft suffered a cabin pressurization failure. During maintenance before the flight, the pressurization system had been set to manual mode for testing and was never switched back to automatic. As the plane climbed higher, the cabin pressure slowly dropped. Warning alarms sounded in the cockpit, but the pilots mistakenly believed the alert was related to an air conditioning problem, not a life-threatening loss of pressure. As the aircraft continued climbing toward 34,000 feet, the oxygen level inside the cabin fell rapidly. One by one, passengers and crew members began to suffer from hypoxia, a condition caused by lack of oxygen. Confusion, dizziness, and eventually unconsciousness spread through the aircraft. Oxygen masks automatically dropped from the ceiling, but many passengers were already too disoriented to react in time. Inside the cockpit, the situation became even worse. Both pilots gradually lost consciousness, leaving the aircraft flying completely on autopilot. The plane continued along its programmed route, silently drifting through the sky with no one truly in control. When Greek air traffic control lost contact with the aircraft, the Hellenic Air Force scrambled 2 F-16 fighter jets to intercept it. When the fighter pilots finally caught up with the Boeing 737, what they saw was chilling. Through the cockpit window, they could see the co-pilot slumped over the controls, completely motionless. Inside the cabin, oxygen masks dangled from the ceiling like ghosts in the silent aircraft. For several minutes, the plane continued circling in the sky above Athens, still on autopilot. Then something unexpected happened. A man suddenly appeared in the cockpit doorway. It was flight attendant Andreas Prodromo, who had managed to remain conscious by using a portable oxygen tank. With limited flight training, he was now the only person capable of trying to save the aircraft. He entered the cockpit and attempted to take control, even briefly acknowledging the fighter pilots flying alongside. But it was already too late. The aircraft had been flying for hours and was running out of fuel. One engine shut down, then the other. Without power and with oxygen supplies running low, Andreas eventually lost consciousness as well. At 12:03 p.m., the aircraft plunged into a hillside near Grammatico, Greece, erupting into flames. All 121 people on board were killed. Investigators later concluded that the disaster was caused by a simple but fatal human error, a pressurization switch left in the wrong position. What began as a small oversight turned a routine flight into what the media would later call the ghost plane. The tragedy remains one of the most haunting reminders of how quickly a silent problem in the sky can turn an aircraft full of passengers into a drifting tomb above the clouds. Malaysia Airlines, MH370. On the night of March 7, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 departed from Kuala Lumpur heading toward Beijing with 239 people on board. The Boeing 777-200ER carried passengers from more than a dozen countries, including families, business travelers, and a group of Chinese calligraphy artists returning from an exhibition. For the first hour, the flight was completely routine. The aircraft climbed smoothly through the dark sky while most passengers settled in for the overnight journey. At 1:19 a.m., Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah made the final routine transmission to air traffic control. "Good night, Malaysian 370. It sounded normal, calm, professional. No distress, no warning. Minutes later, the aircraft vanished from civilian radar. What happened next would become one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. Although the plane stopped communicating with air traffic control, Malaysian military radar continued tracking it. Instead of continuing toward China, the aircraft suddenly turned sharply west, flying back across the Malaysian peninsula and out over the Andaman Sea. Investigators later determined that this dramatic change in course was almost certainly done manually, not caused by a mechanical failure. One theory soon began to dominate the investigation. According to aviation experts, Captain Zahari may have deliberately depressurized the cabin after climbing to a very high altitude. At that height, the oxygen masks would only provide about 15 minutes of air, not enough to sustain passengers for long. Within minutes, everyone on board, passengers and crew, would have lost consciousness. Meanwhile, the aircraft continued flying on autopilot. For nearly 7 hours, MH370 sent automated satellite signals known as handshakes. These signals revealed that the plane kept flying south into the vast emptiness of the Indian Ocean. Eventually, fuel exhaustion would have caused the aircraft to fall from the sky somewhere in one of the most remote areas on Earth. Despite the largest search operation in aviation history, covering more than 120,000 square kilometers of ocean, the aircraft has never been found. Only a few confirmed pieces of debris have washed ashore on islands along the western Indian Ocean years later. The main wreckage and the flight recorders remain missing. Investigators later discovered something unsettling on the captain's personal computer, a flight simulator route that closely resembled the path MH370 likely took into the southern Indian Ocean. Although officials never reached a definitive conclusion, many aviation experts believe the aircraft was deliberately diverted from the cockpit. More than a decade later, the fate of 239 people remains one of the most haunting unanswered questions in modern aviation. For the families left behind, the pain is made even worse by the uncertainty. Without the wreckage, without the final recordings, the ocean still holds the truth about what really happened aboard Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, Alaska Airlines Flight 261. On January 31, 2000, Alaska Airlines Flight 261 departed from Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, heading to Seattle with a scheduled stop in San Francisco. On board the McDonnell Douglas MD-83 were 88 people, 83 passengers, and 5 crew members. It was supposed to be a routine flight along the Pacific coast. Families were returning home from vacation, business travelers prepared for the week ahead, and the experienced flight crew guided the aircraft north over the ocean. Not long after departure, the pilots noticed something unusual. The aircraft's horizontal stabilizer, a critical component that controls the plane's pitch, was not responding properly. Captain Ted Thompson and First Officer Bill Tansky, both highly experienced pilots, began troubleshooting while keeping the aircraft stable. At first, the issue seemed manageable, but the problem continued to worsen. The pilots disengaged the autopilot and tried to manually control the aircraft as they requested permission to divert toward Los Angeles. Then the situation suddenly turned terrifying. At 26,000 feet, the aircraft abruptly pitched nose down, sending the plane into a steep dive toward the Pacific Ocean. The pilots fought desperately to regain control, pulling the aircraft out of the dive just moments before disaster. Investigators later discovered the cause: the jackscrew assembly controlling the stabilizer had worn down due to poor lubrication and maintenance, allowing the mechanism to fail. For a few tense minutes, it seemed the crew might save the aircraft. They attempted to stabilize the plane while preparing for an emergency landing. But the damaged stabilizer failed again. This time, the aircraft rolled violently and flipped upside down, leaving the pilots with almost no control. Passengers inside the cabin experienced terrifying moments as the plane plunged toward the ocean. At 4:21 p.m., Flight 261 slammed nose first into the Pacific Ocean near the California coast at more than 300 miles per hour. The impact destroyed the aircraft, instantly killing all 88 people on board. The tragedy left entire communities in mourning. Among the victims were the Clemenson family from Seattle, parents David and Carolyn traveling with their 4 children. Close family friends, the Pearson family, were also on board with their daughters. What was meant to be a joyful trip home turned into a devastating loss that shattered multiple families at once. In the investigation that followed, authorities determined the crash was completely preventable. The stabilizer failure was caused by excessive wear that should have been detected during maintenance. The disaster became a stark reminder of how a single overlooked mechanical issue can trigger a chain of events that even the most experienced pilots cannot stop. For the families of the victims, the pain never faded. Alaska Airlines Flight 261 became a tragic example of how 9 minutes of mechanical failure and terror in the sky could erase 88 lives and leave behind a silence that would last forever. Washington, D.C. plane crash 2025. On the evening of January 29, 2025, the skies above Washington, D.C. turned into the scene of a devastating aviation disaster. At around 8:47 p.m., a regional passenger jet approaching Reagan National Airport collided midair with a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter over the Potomac River. Within seconds, both aircraft exploded into flames and crashed into the dark water below. All 67 people on board the 2 aircraft were killed. The passenger plane Flight 5342 had departed earlier from Wichita, Kansas, carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew members. Among them were students, professionals, and families returning home. A large group on board was connected to the figure skating community, including young athletes, their coaches, and family members who had been attending a national development training camp. Their dreams of future Olympic competitions were cut short in an instant. Among the victims were 16-year-old skaters Spencer Lane and Jenna Hahn, both rising talents in the sport, traveling with their mothers. Also on board were their renowned Russian coaches Evgenia Shishkova and Vadim Naumov, former world champions who had spent years mentoring young American athletes. The loss sent shockwaves through the international skating community. The flight crew was also remembered for their dedication. Captain Jonathan Campos, 34, had dreamed of flying since childhood and had accumulated nearly 4,000 flight hours. His first officer, Sam Lilly, 28, had recently become engaged and was building his career in aviation. Two flight attendants, Ian Epstein and Denasia Elder, were known among colleagues for their warmth and professionalism. At the same time, the Black Hawk helicopter involved in the collision was conducting a routine night evaluation flight for military pilots from Fort Belvoir. On board were Captain Rebecca Lobach, 28, the pilot undergoing her evaluation, Chief Warrant Officer Andrew Eves, the instructor monitoring the flight, and Staff Sergeant Ryan O'Hara, the crew chief, and a new father. Despite both aircraft being in communication with air traffic control, investigators later discovered that critical airspace coordination failed. A dangerously narrow separation between the helicopter's flight path and the passenger jet's landing approach created a deadly conflict. Reports also revealed that only one air traffic controller was managing multiple aircraft and helicopter routes at the time, a factor that may have contributed to the tragedy. The moment of impact was captured by a nearby camera, showing a sudden flash of light in the sky before debris fell into the river below. Rescue teams rushed to the scene, but the crash had been catastrophic. Over the following days, recovery crews searched the freezing waters of the Potomac, eventually recovering the wreckage and the remains of all 67 victims. The disaster left families across the United States in mourning and raised serious questions about airspace safety around Washington, D.C. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board began examining radar data communications and flight paths to determine exactly how two aircraft could collide in one of the most heavily monitored airspaces in the world. For the victims' families and communities, the tragedy left a permanent scar. What began as an ordinary flight into the nation's capital ended in a catastrophic collision that erased dozens of lives in a single devastating moment above the Potomac River. Which plane crash disturbed you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest videos. It's our latest video. Alaska Airlines Flight 261. On January 31, 2000. Alaska Airlines Flight 261 departed from Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, heading to Seattle with a scheduled stop in San Francisco. On board the McDonnell Douglas MD-83 were 88 people, 83 passengers, and 5 crew members. It was supposed to be a routine flight along the Pacific coast. Families were returning home from vacation, business travelers prepared for the week ahead, and the experienced flight crew guided the aircraft north over the ocean. Not long after departure, the pilots noticed something unusual. The aircraft's horizontal stabilizer, a critical component that controls the plane's pitch, was not responding properly. Captain Ted Thompson and First Officer Bill Tansky, both highly experienced pilots, began troubleshooting while keeping the aircraft stable. At first, the issue seemed manageable, but the problem continued to worsen. The pilots disengaged the autopilot and tried to manually control the aircraft as they requested permission to divert toward Los Angeles. Then the situation suddenly turned terrifying. At 26,000 feet, the aircraft abruptly pitched nose down, sending the plane into a steep dive toward the Pacific Ocean. The pilots fought desperately to regain control, pulling the aircraft out of the dive just moments before disaster. Investigators later discovered the cause: the jackscrew assembly controlling the stabilizer had worn down due to poor lubrication and maintenance, allowing the mechanism to fail. For a few tense minutes, it seemed the crew might save the aircraft. They attempted to stabilize the plane while preparing for an emergency landing. But the damaged stabilizer failed again. This time, the aircraft rolled violently and flipped upside down, leaving the pilots with almost no control. Passengers inside the cabin experienced terrifying moments as the plane plunged toward the ocean. At 4:21 p.m., Flight 261 slammed nose first into the Pacific Ocean near the California coast at more than 300 miles per hour. The impact destroyed the aircraft, instantly killing all 88 people on board. The tragedy left entire communities in mourning. Among the victims were the Clemenson family from Seattle, parents David and Carolyn traveling with their 4 children. Close family friends, the Pearson family, were also on board with their daughters. What was meant to be a joyful trip home turned into a devastating loss that shattered multiple families at once. In the investigation that followed, authorities determined the crash was completely preventable. The stabilizer failure was caused by excessive wear that should have been detected during maintenance. The disaster became a stark reminder of how a single overlooked mechanical issue can trigger a chain of events that even the most experienced pilots cannot stop. For the families of the victims, the pain never faded. Alaska Airlines Flight 261 became a tragic example of how 9 minutes of mechanical failure and terror in the sky could erase 88 lives and leave behind a silence that would last forever. Washington, D.C. plane crash 2025. On the evening of January 29, 2025, the skies above Washington, D.C. turned into the scene of a devastating aviation disaster. At around 8:47 p.m., a regional passenger jet approaching Reagan National Airport collided mid-air with a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter over the Potomac River. Within seconds, both aircraft exploded into flames and crashed into the dark water below. All 67 people on board the two aircraft were killed. The passenger plane Flight 5342 had departed earlier from Wichita, Kansas, carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew members. Among them were students, professionals, and families returning home. A large group on board was connected to the figure skating community, including young athletes, their coaches, and family members who had been attending a national development training camp. Their dreams of future Olympic competitions were cut short in an instant. Among the victims were 16-year-old skaters Spencer Lane